The Vedic civilization existed for thousands of years, and they were not run by a single king or even single clan or a single kingdom. The tradition of Vedas were carried over for many kings, and each king had a unique mentor. These mentors were, were called as Rajgurus. They were the kingmakers, they were the sage counselors, they taught these rulers polity. Uh, they were, when situation demanded, they acted as a selfless statesman. And very interestingly, they were all reclusive hermits. In simple sense, they were selfless. There was nothing that they expected for themselves. So they were like a salt of the earth. They did good, they didn't expect any recognition, and they just went off. The Arthashastra and every Vedic text that we know were essentially written by these rishis. So the Rajgurus were also the rishis of the Vedic era. Now, why were they like this? What were their contribution? Because a person who doesn't even want to be named properly, if you look at Arthashastra, it is, the author introduces himself as Kautilya. The legend says that he was also Chanakya. In Arthashastra, there were other authors who were like Parashara, Pishuna, and we have no clue who they were. There was, they never told anything about themselves. They lived in secret, and they, without any expectation, they just left they just went away. We all know about the material power. The world is going through a very unusual times. People are suffering, not just those who are affected by the COVID-19 virus, but also the people who are living in the economy and who are and who are suffered owing to the economic consequences. Everyone is looking up to the government. So it doesn't matter whether you had an active role in politics or you didn't have an active role in politics. The material power that manifests in politics is clearly visible for everyone to see. We cannot live without the polity, without the administration. And this power has a significant role to play in the times we are living in. Therefore, no matter who you are, you can be a small child, you can be an employed person, you can be a consultant, you are affected by the situation. And if you want to have any chance to get out of these uncertain times, you need to have a greater understanding of this political power. And these are best explained and taught in the Arthashastra by not just Kautilya, but all the other rishis were also called as Rajgurus. So, whatever I'm going to say, although it will have a great many fascinating aspects of all the great rishis before us, it will also suggest us the consequences that these teachings have on our life even to this day. So I'm sure you will be very, if you are able to follow me or if I'm able to explain you right, you will stand to benefit from it. The power or Shakti is there everywhere. If I'm speaking to you, that is Vak Shakti, there's a power that gives me the energy to speak. You have the energy to listen. So without energy, nothing happens in life. The Shakti is crucial. So where do this Shakti come from? Where do we get this energy? There are 8 different forms of Shakti which are enumerated in the Vedic Shastras. They are power sources. The basic one is called Atmana. The, the second one is called Mana or mind. The Atmana is consciousness, our true self. Some people may call it soul, but the definition of soul is that it is a part of the body which may go to heaven and earth. Whereas your true self is your whole existence. And it is the Atmana that makes everything and every part of our body possible. Mana is that with which we react without much thoughts. Atmana is that which makes us think. So if you are doing anything on a reactionary basis, those actions come from the mana. And if you are taking any decision based on a very clear thought process, then that decision and those actions come from your Atmana. If you are taking a decision or taking an action based on purely mana, it is going to be detrimental. Whereas anything that you do it from the standpoint of Atmana, it is going to be the action that is inspired by wisdom. Now, all these actions are then brought into force through shariram, or basically, this body. And this sharira has something called jnana, that is knowledge, and vijnana, or wisdom. The jnana, as we have understood in the previous webinars, they stem from the information, data, and understanding of the facts around us. Vijnana comes also from this and through the constant contemplation with experience. When you have achieved wealth through this jnana, vijnana, and atmana, that becomes artham, or wealth. Wealth is a very important power in the world today. And it is not just currency, as we have understood in our first webinar. Through artha, we also earn what is called padavim. Padavim is position, which you gain in an organization or even in a family or even in a state, affairs of the state. And ultimately, it is Rajya. And this order is suggested because if you want to have access to the political power or the power to affect the life of others, you must first understand who you are. And it all begins a journey of self-discovery, that is Atmana. The political power, as we know it, has three major limitations. They are dukkha mishritam, you get a lot of pain because of it. It brings you a lot of stress. So the moment you earn your promotions in your workplace, or you get more clients, you get more business, the stress always goes up. So it is dukkha mishritam. It will bring you some amount of pain. 2, atriptikatvam. It is never satisfactory. The more power you have, if you are thinking only by the mana or the mind, you will ask for more and more of it. And third one is that it is bandhakatvam. You don't know when to stop. So it is holding you hostage at every point in time. So these three are the major limitations which also cause a significant amount of suffering in the hearts and minds of the rulers, because of which they often take rash decisions, creating sophisticated consequences, as we know. Just look at any major ruler who has ruled his land for more than 10 years. When they come to power, everyone, praises them. They are called messiahs. They are called saviors, angels. But eventually, as they get settled in power, these three painful elements creep in and that leads to their certain downfall. The power, you must understand, is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. So no matter what power you have, the power is neither good nor bad. It is how you are going to use it. You can use the power to build, to sustain, as well as destroy. With knowledge, this power will help us to build. With wisdom, it helps us to sustain this power. And without knowledge and wisdom, this power will exclusively cause a certain destruction. As we have already discussed, the root of power is Atmana and Mana. The Atmana first and Mana. So those who are new today, let me recollect a couple of things I said in the previous two webinars. The early Vedic text only concerned with the body and mind. And for a long time, the rishis thought that we were originally the mana or the mind. So eventually, as the years passed, during the era when the Upanishads were written, they observed that when people are deep asleep, the mind is not there, but still that person is there, right? So who is that? So if we can exist without the mana or the mind, then we are not the mana. Then what are we? And that is how they came with this terminology called Atmanaha. That is something that transcends the mind. The mana is controlled by Atmana, or rather it must. But a great many people think that they are mind. If you just ask anyone if he's doing some heinous thing, he or she would say that I'm doing this because I want it, I feel good. So what is that I? That I for them is mana. Mind is like a monkey, it is never stable. What it gets today might bring it happiness, but only for a second. There's a great saying, the happiness of the mind is always momentary. It is valued by mind only in two circumstances. One, when you don't have it, and second, when you have lost it. So when you don't have it and when you have it, the impulses of the mind are virtually one and the same. So when the mana forgets the Atmana, or it doesn't identify itself with its own true self, it causes confusion, because anything that mind asks, your body works for it, and it incurs actions that creates a lot of suffering, chaos, and ultimately your own destruction. And hear me clearly. Even if you satisfy every requirement or every desire of your mind, there is absolutely no guarantee that you will be happy. So there is no point in pleasing your own mind. What your mind wants today, it may not want tomorrow. For example, when you are a child, being with your mother would have been the most wonderful thing for you. But when you grew up and you started playing with your friends or your cousins or your brothers or siblings, that game would have been more amusing to your mind than when you are a toddler. When you grow up, the company of the women or men would find very amusing to your mind. Okay? But eventually when you are on a deathbed, all that you expect is, oh, I hope I had a good health, which you actually had until you became old. So pleasing mana is what almost everyone will do. But pleasing mind is a vain business. It is going to yield you no happiness at all. Someone asked a rishi how to find a blissful happiness. How do we become absolutely blissful? And he said, rest your mind. So this person said, but how am I going to enjoy without the mind? So the rishi said, do you remember the time when you are deep asleep? He said, yeah, yeah. How did you feel? Oh, wonderful. When you are deep asleep, did you remember who you are, your name? He said, no. Did you remember what money you had? No. Kind of friends or enemies? No. So basically, your mind was not there, but you are there when you are deep asleep, correct? He said, yes. And did you find that happiness, that bliss anywhere else? And he answered is no. So he said, if you want the absolute happiness, control your mind. That means don't do everything what your mind says. Don't do any action without thinking twice. Now, all these teachings of the rishis, they require a lot of solitary peace. There's one beautiful story Avadhuta Dattatreya says in his book called Avadhuta Gita. He said that one day he observed a young girl, at home, who was alone because her parents had gone somewhere else. And during this time, a prospective groom family came to her house. So as any dutiful girl, she asked them to come in and sit in front of the, have a nice seat. And she went into the kitchen to prepare food. But when she was preparing food, her bangles were making too much of a noise. So she removed all the bangles from her hands, except one on each hand. So Avadhuta Dattatreya says, looking at this, he said that the person who desires wisdom must always remain alone or seek as much solitude as possible. Now, solitude is not an easy thing for the people in power. Lot of people will seek their appointments. Everyone will bother them. Probably they will not even have time to sleep. So how are they going to achieve this peace? This peace. And during this Vedic eras, that peace was usually said to have been brought to them through their knowledge and wisdom by these Rajgurus. You must always understand that a greatest threat to rulers comes not from outside. It is not from your opposition party. It is from your own party, okay? The people who are with you. So if you become a prime minister, the minister next to you will always be yearning for a chance to topple you down. And this is the thumb rule. It doesn't matter in which country. It has no geographical limitation. It has no religious limitation. This is the fact. So, and the regretful thing is that everyone in power also understands this. They know that the people closest to them could be plotting against to topple him, and that he or she may not be able to do anything. So the biggest problem for a ruler is whom to trust. And therefore, this power, when without the understanding or the consistent approach to the consciousness, that is Atmana, it leads to paranoia. They go mad. That's the reason why some politician takes brash decisions. Okay, and most often such decisions leads to destruction. Trust, or in Vedic Sanskrit, Vishwasam, is an extremely rare commodity for the rulers. And the ones they trust, the history will confirm this fact, often fail to retain it for many reasons. So if there is someone a ruler is trusting, and if that person's trust is public or known to his opponents within his organization, there is obvious chances that people will try to break that trust. Or maybe that person who has the maximum trust might leverage it to get something for him or her own self. So the trust is not easy to come by. The another thing we need to understand is that if you have if you earn someone's trust or loyalty by money, it is quite obvious that someone else could just buy that same loyalty by a little more money. That's how the world has been. Because the mind, because most people don't understand who they are. They just think that they are the mana, the mind, that which gives them desire. Oh, I want that. He has it. Oh, she has it. I too must have it. Oh, she is going to do that, so probably even I must do something similar. Oh, he has done something and he is getting so much of likes and followers. So probably, even let me try doing that. This is the natural human tendency. And everybody would like a taste of power. So it is not easy to trust. However, these Rajagurus, you must understand, were essentially accomplished people. They were rishis, they were scientists, they were doctors, they were diplomats, scholars, writers, and even kings. For example, one of the most revered Vedic king, Vikramaditya of Ujjain, his Rajaguru was his own elder brother, who was also a king, who was his predecessor. And he left his power of his own volition and he became a hermit sage. So every time Vikramaditya had a problem, if he didn't know whom to trust as to what was happening, he would seek his elder brother, his guru and his Rajguru to give him counsel. And he could trust him. Why? Because he has relinquished the world. He has no desire. And if he wanted the power in the first place, he would have not given it to his brother in any case. And most of these rishis, one of the things most people often abuse is that, some people like to think that the Vedic rishis were against money. Okay, that you have to live without money, you have to live in poverty. That is the so-called Vedic ideal. Trust me, nothing is farther from this truth. All the Vedic rishis were very accomplished people. Some were even businessmen, some were even criminals in their previous age. For example, the author of Ramayana, Valmiki, was known as Ratnakara, a dacoit. He used to loot people, in the villages when the caravan would pass from one place through his forest. And it's only when he met Narada that he had a change of heart, and then he became a rishi. Some were even doctors, surgeons. The first surgery the world has ever known, Sushruta, was also a rishi. If you know or are benefiting from something like meditation, yoga, or Ayurveda, they were all the works of the rishis, and they were accomplished people. And eventually, they relinquished their position of power and they started living away from the seat of power and even civilization into the forest. They lived away from the vagaries of life, away from civilizations, and more farther from the seat of power. They had relinquished their selfish desires for the universal welfares. These rishis who became Rajgurus had no secrets, they had no desires, no shred of expectations for rewards or awards, let alone publicity. Okay? So while the kings knew them well, nobody else knew who they were. So how easy is it for a ruler or a king to believe a person who accomplished so much in his life, and yet he let go of everything and live a life of a hermit? There is a beautiful story I would like to recollect here. A long time ago, say, 4,000 years back, there was a very prosperous kingdom and there was a king. Eventually, he got old and he was on his deathbed. So when he was on his deathbed, he called his son and he said, "Son, rule well, and no matter what, never ever, uh, you know, ignore the counsel of our prime minister." The young prince agreed. Eventually, the king died, and the prince became the king. So, when prince became the king, as any new ruler would like to do, he wanted to bring in a great many measures to ensure prosperity and power to his position and his kingdom. So every time he brought a plan and he would discuss in his cabinet, the prime minister would always come out with some criticism. He would say that, no, this is not going to happen. No, that is not good. Okay. He resisted, he put up with this prime minister for 5 long years. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore. So one day, when king brought in a new plan to be implemented and to get the consent of his council of ministers, as you predicted, the prime minister opposed to it. So the king got very angry and he said, "You old man, don't you find anything good in what I do? Okay, what is wrong with you?" Okay, and he went lambasted. It was almost certain that king wanted to fire him. So the old minister, the prime minister, stood in front of the king and he said, "My young master, now that I am going, okay, I'm grown old, I will tell you what your greatest virtue is. For 5 long years as a king, you have patiently stood my criticism. Only a king with that much of patience can be anywhere close to great. This is your greatest virtue, my young king." And saying this, he went. The king couldn't resist. So he went to minister and he said, "Please, uh, don't go, stay back in power. I will use you. Sorry, my mistake." So this old minister said that, "King, nobody should live in a position of power for too long. I have served 3 kings in this empire. You are the third one, and I am old. Okay, and now it's time for me to retire. Let me retire. Let me go." So the legend has it that this minister eventually became the Rajguru for the king. And and every time the king was unable to take a decision or was confused or had any lot of troubles, finding the solution, he would go and consent with this minister who had started to live as a hermit, in a distant forest. Why? Just because it was easier to trust a person who had left his position and wealth. The word Rajaguru, as is very obvious, has 2 words in it. The first one is Raja, and the second one is Guru. The word Guru is the most abused word in the modern times. For example, we have marketing gurus, we have political gurus, we have wisdom, we have spiritual gurus, and the kind of the definition the word the guru has is nowhere close to the word was understood in the Vedic times. So what is this word guru? The word guru also is made of 2 words, Vedic Sanskrit words, gu or ignorance and ru or slayers. So basically, guru is anyone who can slay or destroy the ignorance in your mind. So what is ignorance? Ignorance is nothing but that which brings you pain, which always makes you suffer. And anyone who can help you to find that ignorance and destroy it, alleviate from your mind, that person becomes your guru. Adi Shankaracharya, one of the greatest Vedic sages of the Advaita philosophy say, he has written a beautiful poem called Manisha Panchakam. And in Manisha Panchakam, Shankaracharya says, I don't care if he's a Shudra, if he's a low class person, if he's dark or white or anything. If he can give me knowledge, if he can destroy my ignorance, he is my Guru. The most perfect definition of a Guru is also there in the Vedic text. This one comes from Mahabharata of Vyasa, from a specific section called as Shanti Parva. So those who don't know Mahabharata well, the Shanti Parva is a time when Bhishma is injured in the battlefield by the arrows of Arjuna, and he is waiting for his time to arrive to deliver him from his painful thing. So basically, he is waiting for his death. So when he is waiting for his death, Krishna goes to Yudhishthira and says, Yudhishthira, the kingdom which you are seeking was built, it was made as formidable as it is today by one person who could have been a king, but he relinquished it because his father could marry again. Okay? And he has made 3 kings and served them well. He is an oracle in himself. He is a fountain of knowledge. Go to him, talk to him, and benefit from his wisdom. So every day after the war, the Vedic wars had a specific time. It was from the beginning of the sunrise to the sunset. It were not the wars that we face today. There were a lot of principles and rules involved. So every day after the war, Yudhishthira would go to Bhishma, sit beside him, and ask him questions. And he would ask many questions. And one of the questions he asked is, Pitamaha. Pitamaha is like grandfather. What is the definition of a guru? And Bhishma said, Dharmadnyo dharmakartacha sada dharma parayanaha tatvebhyaha sarva shastrartha deshako guru ruchyate. Dharmadnyo, one who knows dharma. Dharmakartacha, one who follows the dharma relentlessly. Just sada dharma parayana, one who can understand and effortlessly live the life of dharma. Tatvebhyaha, one who is very knowledgeable. Sarva shastrartha, who understands every available knowledge that is available to mankind. Deshako, one who has seen the world. Guru ruchyate. Only that person is deserving to be called a guru. Now, we are living in a times where almost anyone with a little bit of publicity, some makeups, long beards can be made into a guru. And we also have guru amid our mixed so-called quote-unquote gurus who often try to suggest that, oh, I didn't read any books. Why should I read any books? And we have so many people, thousands of people following them. But they do not in any ways set or can be equated to this great position of a guru. Here is a very interesting parable for you. It is about a Brahman who made or called a prostitute his guru. So the story goes like this. It comes in Avadhuta Dattatreya's book, Avadhuta Gita. The story is that one day a Brahman, who had a when he was in his market, he happened to see a prostitute, and she was very beautiful, and she was a very so-called elitist. So her clients were the royalties and rich business class people. Now this Brahman was not really rich, yet in one night, in the middle of the night, he went to this prostitute's house and knocked on the door. This prostitute was very, she was very pursuant of the knowledge. Nobody becomes a prostitute by choice. We all know that. So she was very glad to see that such a great Brahman, and he was a very well acknowledged and a literate and revered intellectual of his time. So she said, please come in. And she got him inside, and she said, what can I do for you, O Brahman? She said. The Brahman said, I desire to enjoy you. So the prostitute said, sir, I have a great respect for you. If you wish to enjoy my body, that is a price. This is my dharma, and I cannot give it for free. However, if you are here to ask for some donations, I will be more than happy to give it to you. Okay. So this Brahmin took it on his ego, and he said that, okay, so what is your price? So she told her price, and it was certainly too much for the Brahmin to afford. The Brahmin said, I will come back, and I'll come back with the price, befitting you. And he went. Years passed by, and he somehow managed to gather that money. And he came to see this prostitute again. Now, this prostitute was smitten by a very rich, charming merchant who had said that, he was going to visit her that night. And it was very late. And she shouted, why have I wasted my time on this silly idiot? Instead, had I given this time to understanding the knowledge of wisdom and myself, I would have been an enlightened person by now. The Brahman listened it, and he realized, oh my God, isn't that true? And he realized that how he had wasted his knowledge on some carnal desires, okay, to get some wealth for just silly carnal desire. So he took that whole wealth, dropped it at the feet of the prostitute, touched their feet, and said, you have showed me my folly, so you are my guru. However, when every time people talk about the guru, I recollect this interesting story. So one day, a person wanted to have a perfect guru for himself, and he went everywhere he could. So any guru he met, he said, oh no, he's not good. Oh, he's too tall, he's too small. Oh no, he doesn't talk well. He acts funny. He had every skill to find some limitation in any of the so-called gurus he met. Few years passed by, and then his friend came to know that he had apparently found a quote-unquote perfect guru. Now this friend was curious, so he took a long and tedious journey to this person, and he said, so how did you find this perfect guru? Oh, he said me what I wanted to, he said me something which nobody has said. Really? What is that? And this person said, he said to me that I am the perfect disciple. There is a kind of an undeclared axiom that the guru is always right, no matter what guru says, a shishya has to follow, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And that is how a lot of so-called the modern age gurus have abused their disciples or the students or whatever they like to call them. But is that a Vedic precept? Let me tell you another story, or rather a parable. One day, Shiva, who is also called as Yogeshwara or the Grand Master of Yoga, was taking lessons on morality to his bunch of students. And after the class was over, he looked at his students and he said, go and fetch me a girl from there. Now these people were shocked. What is this our guru saying? Okay, and how can we say no to him? So, well, everybody was like in a dilemma and they were shocked. One person, one kid by the name Jamadagneya Rama. Jamadagneya means son of Jamadagni. His father was a rishi and he was called Jamadagni and his name was Rama. Went to Shiva, took his axe and smacked him on his head. Everyone was, all the students were shocked. What is he doing? So while everybody started shouting at him, Shiva was pleased. He was bleeding, but he was smiling. And he said, my son, while these people didn't even have the ability to think the right action, you took the right decision. Okay? And from that time onwards, the Shiva gave him the axe. And because of the axe, which is called Parashu, Jamadagneya Rama came to be known as Parashurama. And Shiva, who got a scar on his head because of the brute attack by the axe, came to be known as Khanda Parashu, or one who was hit by an axe. So believe me, there is no original Vedic text where there is absolute submission to the Guru. You have to respect your Guru, no doubts, but you don't have to accept everything and anything they say. In Mahabharata, there is a story between Parashurama, the same Jamadagneya Rama, and his student Bhishma. So they had a disagreement over something. So Parashurama said that, you got to follow me. So Bhishma said, sir, I respect you, but I don't think that is the right thing to do for me. So then he said, okay, then you got to fight me. So both had an absolute fight. And for everyone's astonishment, Parashurama lost the battle to Bhishma. So Bhishma said, sir, you are my guru, you have taught me, you have made me what I am. So please leave this battlefield because I cannot kill you. So Parashurama said, I have never, left a battlefield, and I'll never do that now. If I'm going to die right now, please go ahead, he said. So Bhishma, the person who had won the battle, as a mark of respect to his guru, he left the battlefield. This is the kind of respect the guru and shishya enjoyed. And it was not a blind belief. There's no dictum. There's no way that, a guru can say to do some shabby things to a shishya and shishya would do it. On the contrary, it is only when the shishya had the courage to disagree with his guru was that shishya heralded. So please stay advised. The so-called idea of a guru being absolute is not a Vedic concept in the first place. So the guru, for all our good communication in this webinar, is actually a mentor. And Rajaguru can be better understood as the mentor to the king. And every major or every heralded, the king or rajas or maharajas of the Vedic era had a Rajaguru. The king Bharata, after whom India is also called Bharat in major vernacular languages in this country, had a Rajguru by the name Bharadwaja. Bharadwaja was also the same Rishi and a Rajguru who was the first author of Arthashastra. Rama, the same Rama of Valmiki's Ramayana, had Vashishta. Vikramaditya, as I just said, had Bhartrihari, who was also his predecessor king and his Rajguru. Chandragupta Maurya had Chanakya. Hakka and Bukka, the founders of the great Vijayanagara kingdom in the South India, had Vidyaranya. So all the successful kings, all the great rulers of this land always had an equally great Rajagurus who are absolutely selfless. Nobody knew about them even when they were alive. Very few people knew them. For example, people like us might know because we are interested in the text. But for the great many of them, they have no clue who these people were. Anonymity was their strength. Selflessness was from where they derived their power. To be called as a Rajaguru, you needed to have 5 major qualities. The first one is that these Rajagurus had relinquished every selfishness. There's no trace of selfishness there. It was not like, okay, the king had a problem, he went to the Rajaguru and he paid him some money and he came back. There was no material transaction of wealth. The king respected him, but he didn't expect that respect from him. There's actually a legend that when these Rajagurus came to the kingdom, and they came to the kingdom only when they disagreed with the king. For example, when Rajguru would listen that king is doing something wrong, he would just walk into the royal palace, into the court, and a king would get up from his throne and ask the Rajguru to sit on the throne. And the Rajguru would tell the king, "You are doing wrong, my son, fix this." And they would do it, they would comply it. But all this request they made for the king was not for their selfishness. It was not because they wanted to make some money or they wanted name or fame. Once their work was done, they would leave the kingdom. They never lived in the palaces for long, maybe for a day or two. They just went back into that same old hermitage amid the forest. Equanimity of mind. There is a saying which comes in Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says it. Yo na hrishyati na dveshti. One who is neither too elated nor too sad. Okay. Na shochayati. Neither to broods too much. Na kankshati. Neither expects anything from people. Shubha ashubha parityagi. One who has no idea of profit and loss when it comes from a personal angle. Bhakti manyaha same priya. That wise person is very dear to me. What Krishna is saying here is about equanimity of mind. Nobody has ever seen a Rajguru cry or this Rajguru laugh. They would come, they would have a steady mind, they would have a steady language, and no matter what, they would communicate in the same tone and they would remain calm. So if a person cannot be calm and if he is hyper and he expects too much of publicity, he is not qualified to be a Rajguru. The third quality is that detachment. You must understand, detachment is not in absence of love. To be detached doesn't mean that you should not love anyone. On the contrary, detachment is having love for every being that can live, breathe, and move. But detachment is when you love them and you don't expect them to love you back. And all these Rajagurus were detached in this truest sense. The fourth quality is that they were highly knowledgeable. Nobody can advise a king and help him out of his problems if they don't understand the ways of the world. You need to know the world, and you cannot know the world without knowledge. And knowledge is not just bookish knowledge. It is also the knowledge of talking to people, observing things, observing the world around us, and learning from it through contemplation. And these Rajagurus were amazingly knowledgeable. And let's not forget, they were also the authors of probably the only text on true leadership, that is Arthashastras. And the fifth and the most important point is that they were beyond wisdom. Now, if anybody has a knowledge, they would like to show off. Every time I get one of the fascinating Vedic quotes, I would like to put it on my Facebook or social media page. Okay? However, if there is a desire in us to show off, even a minute of it, or even if somebody is saying that, I have so much, but I don't want to show off. Oh, I have did this, I have done that, but I don't want to show off. Then that person is without wisdom. And anyone without wisdom was considered incompetent to be called as a Rajaguru, or even a guru for that matter. The beautiful text Bhojaraja says is that how he defined. Bhojaraja was another great king from Ujjain, and he said that Rajagurus are nate dvesha rago nate lobha moho mado naiva te naiva matsarya bhavaha. They neither have the enmity nor do they have friendship or the too amusing connections with anyone or infatuation for anyone. Na lobha moho, neither the lobha or nor the desire for expectations. Mado neva, they have no egos. Okay. Na te neva matsarya baha, they never keep enmity. So, dvesha, raga, lobha, moha, and matsarya. These are the 5 qualities one must shun before even they can be a Rajaguru in the Vedic context. There is another word in the Vedic text. It is called Raja Purohita. There are quotes like Raja Rashtra Kritam Papam, Rajna Papam Purohitaha. So Raja, the king, bears the Rashtra Kritam Papam. What the wrong his people does, the king bears that consequence. Okay. Rajya Papam Purohita. So all the things, wrongdoings of the king are borne by his Purohit. So Purohit are priests, and they came, and they are not the same as Rajagurus. Purohitas lived in the kingdom, but Rajagurus never lived in the kingdom or even in the palace. There's a beautiful story. When Raja Bharata, after whom India is also called as Bharat, assumed the throne and he was anointed, he called his Rajaguru, Bharadwaja, to crown him. So after he was crowned, Bharata declared, Adandos me, Adandos me, Adandos me. I cannot be punished, I cannot be punished, I cannot be punished. And everyone agreed, except Bharadwaja. And he shouted in equally loud voice, Dharma Dandosi, Dharma Dandosi, Dharma Dandosi. Dharma will judge you, Dharma will judge you, Dharma will judge you. And this tradition has been carried on from the time of Bharata until all the way until the Mauryan Empire. So a king also was not someone who was beyond Dharma. If he doesn't follow Dharma, there are going to be consequences. So the definition of Rajguru, what can it be? This definition is found in Valmiki's Ramayana. This is what Valmiki says. Raja Preraka Suchakaschaiva Vachako Darshakastatha Shikshako Bodhakastaiva Shadete Raja Guravas Sprutah. Raja Preraka, one who inspires the king. Suchakaschaiva, one who warns him of the unforeseen consequences. Vachako, one who can explain things to the king. Darshakastata, one who can give a broad vision to the ruler. Shikshako, one who educates the king. Bodhakastaiva, one who can give the intellectually sound arguments to the king. These 6 are the qualities of the Rajagurus. When we say power, we think that, oh, if he is a powerful person, everybody must know him. Who is the most popular person in the free world? Undisputably, it is the President of the United States. He's the most powerful man in the free world. But is he? Is his power absolute? He is checked for all good reasons by the Constitution of the United States. He is answerable to the Congress and to the Senate. Anything he has to do, he has to counsel everyone. No power, and his power is limited to 4 or maximum 8 years tenure. That is 2 tenures. Who else do you think is powerful? There's no person who is really powerful in the truest of sense. And we have some magazines today who say that, okay, 100 most powerful people on earth. Okay, and we have some some names in everything. What is the definition of power? That they are visible. Is visibility a power? Let's take, for example, a story from the from the Torah, the story of the great King David and Goliath. So when Goliath challenged everyone said that, oh, he is too big. Whereas the King David said that, oh no, he's too big to miss. So, and the Kutaniti, which is the covert politics of the Arthashastra, they clearly say that any person who is visible, who can be ascertained, who can be assessed, who can be manipulated and can be destroyed. So you are never powerful if people know you or if you are very popular with people. Kings have known to be by everyone. Okay, so moment you are the king, people have to know you. So by that definition, you are not powerful at all. On the contrary, you have more enemies coming your way day in and day out. So it's not easy to be in position of power, or so-called being powerful. However, the Rajagurus have no intent of being known in public. Although the king knew them, the other people hardly knew them. And therefore, they remained untouched from anything. They could live quietly and peacefully. They could think, they could analyze, they could visualize, and they could come up with a good plan every time the king would sought their advice. So the most powerful person in the Vedic Empire were not the kings, but were their Rajagurus. And they were more powerful because there was nothing that was stopping from. They never feared death. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody knew where they lived except the king. And most of the people would always think that the king. So, the true definition of power and the true definition of a Rajaguru are actually one and the same. Now, as I suggested, people tend to conspire against kings or rulers for their position, power, and strength. Rajagurus have neither the position, neither that visible power, and nor that visible material wealth. However, their power was absolute. And we have seen the Rajagurus like Chanakya and Vidyaranya, who literally brought no voices. They identified young children, mentored them, and made them kings. What can be more powerful than a person who is not known, who has nothing for himself, no great acknowledgement, no great publicity, and yet he can make kings? Beat that. Always remember, Rajaguru was never a profession, because Rajaguru is never paid in material terms. If a ruler is to pay something to someone, then that relationship is material. If you buy your loyalty for money, as I already said, the others can buy the same loyalty for a little more money. They say that the Rajaguru is stronger when a celibate, hermit, or a true sannyasi. Most of them were sannyasis. Bharadwaja was married, but most of the authors of Arthashastra had no family, and they lived a very hermetic life, a Spartan life. Now, the idea of sannyasa is often misunderstood. A lot of people today say that, oh, I have left my family for the sake of the betterment of the world. I am a sannyasi. That very idea is, in the Vedic perspective, is egotistical. So if you are having an ego that, okay, I am leaving this for the benefit of the world, then that is not sannyasa. Sannyasa is satya nyasa, a path of seeking the truth, the ultimate truth, understanding our own true self, our conscious self, Atmana. And the sannyasi, although he doesn't have a family of his own, for him, the entire world is a family. One of the greatest and the most popular sloka of the Vedas, that is, Vasudha eva kutumbakam, the whole world is family, is actually one of the definitions that is for a sannyasi. There's a beautiful story in this context I must recollect. So one day, a rishi was meditating in the forest, and a beautiful damsel looked at the rishi and found him to be very amusing. So this damsel went to the rishi and tried to impress upon him to marry her. So the rishi asked, "Why do you want to marry me?" So the damsel couldn't know what to answer, and she said that, so that I can have as a handsome son as you. So the rishi answered, "Mother, why do you want to struggle so much? Why do you want to have the pain of carrying a child for 9 months? Rather consider me only as your son." Okay. There's another story I want to recollect in this aspect. Long ago, there was a king, and he always had, and every time he had a problem, he would go and visit a rishi, or sometime invite him into his kingdom. And rishis had no egos. So some of the rishis, if they were sent for, and if the king was too busy, he would send a messenger, and the messenger would say that the king is very busy, but he needs your counsel. So can you please visit the kingdom? And the rishi would come. So every time the rishi came to his kingdom, and the rishi had a different lifestyle, he would beg for food. He had no kitchen. He would beg for food from others to live. And most of the time he would sit, meditate, or write, or read, something like that. So every time he would come to the kingdom, the king would have a good vegetarian feast, and the rishi would enjoy it, and he would say, "Annadata sukhi bhava." Now that you have given me food, let you be happy. And one day, out of turn, he happened to say that, "Oh, what a nice food! I'm not sure when I'm going to have this next." So the king felt very sad. Here is a sage person who is solving the great affairs of the state, and he's living out there, no recognition, no money, nothing. So he couldn't resist but tell this rishi that, "Rishi, why don't you stay here? I'll get you a house. I'll get you a place to stay. I'll give you nice food every day." So the rishi said, "Raja, everyone has their own dharma to follow. You do yours. You live the life you are supposed to live. Let me live mine." And he went. That night, the king couldn't sleep. Now, how can a king sleep when a person so dear to him has to beg for food, and there's no guarantee that somebody would give him nice food even once in a month? So next day, he passed a decree. He said that, now he didn't wanted anyone to know that he was his Rajaguru. So he said that anyone with long beard, flowing hair, matted hair, wearing the Rudraksha and saffron robes must be given delicious food. Okay. So people obliged. So next day when this rishi went to beg, he got nice food. Now looking at this rishi, there were some useless fellows in the city. They thought, this guy does nothing and he gets good food. So they also went on a fancy dress. They got a matted hair, flowing beard and everything, and they started begging for food. Now the rishi came to know of it, and he felt very sad that these people are, wasting the goodwill of the king and everyone. So next day, the rishi went outside a wine shop, and he said, "Do you have something for me to fill my stomach?" He said, "This is a wine shop. I can only give you wine." So he said, "Okay, will do." So rishi took the wine and he drank it, and he said, "Thank you so much," and he went away. Now all these dunderheads, they came to, "Oh, the rishi drank wine. Wow, let's also go and drink wine." Okay, so everyone started getting into the wine shop, and the wine shop couldn't say no to it. So one day he had enough, and he went to the king and he said that, "King, this is what is happening." And king got very furious. He said, "Nothing doing." So he retracted his order, saying that no food, nothing should be given to such rishis anymore. Now these dunderheads, they went back to the business, what they were up to, but the rishi was without a food. Now what to do? The rishis, as I have already suggested, to call a rishi, you need, or even a Rajguru, you need to have an equanimity of mind. So when you have a problem, the rishis never feel sad, nor they are elated when somebody gives them something. They're happy, but they're not like overly excited or enticed by it. So next day he went outside the, a goldsmith shop. He said that, "Sir, do you have some food for me to eat?" He said, "What can I give you? I don't have food. I just have a molten gold." He said, "Okay, that will do." Now the goldsmith thought that, this guy would have gone mad. So for the fun of it, he gave him the molten gold. And the rishi drank. And he was stunned. The news spread like a wildfire. And the king came to know of it. So the king realized what it was all about. So he went in search of the rishi and finally met him, touched his feet. He said, "I'm sorry, sir. This was not my intent. I thought I came to know that you are drinking wine and everything." He said, "Son, remember, I am a rishi. I'm supposed to live an ascetic, hermetic life. This is my dharma. This is my karma. I have to live like this. Don't do any favors for me because it will only have some detrimental consequences, as you have seen already. So you live happily, I will live happily. So Rishi went happily, although the king was not so much happy. I hope you like this story. So now let us get on with the question and answer sessions. So anyone has any questions can I'll be happy to, can ask it in the chat, or you can raise your hand, whichever is convenient for you. Okay. Ajay Vinay, can you explain the 2-point? Okay. Which 2-point, Ajay? Can you please let me know? The second point of the qualities of Rajgurus. Okay. So let me re-verify the second quality. Okay. Equanimity of mind. So it is natural for anyone to be extremely happy when they have got what they wanted. Okay. And it is also equally natural for anyone to get sad when situation is not going as they expected it. So if you are feeling happy or sad depending on the situation, then your mind is not equanimous. Okay. So to have an equanimous mind, you need to have the steady mind no matter what. So today you have a profit, today you have a loss. If you have a steady thing, okay, you would say, okay, you have a profit, good. Let me save something from the profit. If you have a loss, okay, I had a profit other day, so let me balance from it. And you don't get too excited, you don't get too obsessed by the situation about it. That means the equanimity of mind. It is also called in Vedic Sanskrit as Sthita Prajna. This is a new point, Mrudul. Cannot be followed blindly. Can you place the source? Is there a source to this contrary? Of course, Mrudul. You must read Vyasa's Mahabharata. Vyasa's Mahabharata, it is very important to know that there are actually the two stories, there are two books. One is Vyasa's Mahabharata and another one is called Bhagavata. Now, both the text where if you know the two Sanskrit, that is the Vedic Sanskrit and the Panini Sanskrit, they have different languages and they were written in different times. So in Krishna, in Vyasa's Mahabharata, is a Yogeshwara, Grand Master of Yoga. He had only one wife, Rukmini, and he was a statesman. Whereas in Bhagavata, he had 15,000 wives, he had a lot of escapades with a lot of women, so on and so forth. So they are not two people. Any Vedic text, I'm telling you, there is a clear demarcation. For example, I told you the story of Bhishma, who had a disagreement with Parashurama and they fought. And Parashurama lost for Bhishma. And Bhishma said, please retreat from the battlefield so that, I don't have to kill you. So Parashurama said, I'm not going to do that. So in respect of Parashurama, as a respect, Bhishma retreated from the battlefield, but he held on to his argument. Now, do you want more stories than this? I would say, just read on. If you go to archive.org, you'll find every original Sanskrit text to the best of the ability for free. Just go and find any of this original text, translated them yourself if you can, and you can verify that everything I have said, that you don't have to follow a guru blindly to be true. Okay, so Kanishka Pant. Considering the modern times, it is highly difficult to find a guru with the same qualities like in the earlier times. So it means that if we have someone who have even the certain qualities, we can consider them as a guru. Remember, I just try to recollect the story of, where the Brahmin calls prostitute a guru. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that the Brahmin became a prostitute. Okay. But he benefited from what she had said, although she may have not benefited from it. So everybody is a guru for us in that sense. The sun is a guru, he selflessly emits the light in the morning and he helps us to create our food. He is a guru. Any person you have observed is a guru. But that doesn't mean that you call him a guru, you follow him blindly. Use your intellect, question him, challenge him or her. And even the animals can be a guru. If you read Avaduta's story or his book called Avaduta Dattatreya, he says he has 24 gurus. And in that, one of his guru is water. He says that water, flows so freely and it always lives in the most lowest portion of earth. Okay. That humility of water I benefit from. And because that water teaches me humility, Avaduta Dattatreya says, water is my guru. So anybody is your guru. Even your friend can be your guru. Even your enemy can be your guru. So are you going to blindly, listen and adhere to everything your enemy has to say? No, right? I hope this helps. Ami Jain, how to overcome the mind? Is there any mention of it in the Arthashastra? Okay. I have always said in most of my articles and my books that the Arthashastra doesn't consider itself with the mind, defining dharma. It uses the word dharma, karma, artha, kama, moksha, but it doesn't define this. There's no moksha in Arthashastra, but dharma, karma is there. That is because it was presumed by the authors of Arthashastra that anyone who will come to read Arthashastra will know the definition of this from the earlier text, that is the Vedas, Upanishads and everything. So without understanding the true meaning of this Vedic text, you cannot decode Arthashastra at all. I hope it helps. Okay. So Rajesh Naik says that Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, I guess, right? Okay. That's only one Xi Jinping I have heard of, is the most powerful person. Okay. What is the definition of power? If you are powerful, nobody will mess with you. So technically, nobody would try to mess with Xi Jinping in China as we know it, correct? But if you look at the world around, everybody is trying to mess around with them. The American president is going on a rampage against him. The Europeans, the Germans, they are upset with them. Japan is furious. Taiwan is upset. And everyone is looking for an opportunity to get back at the Chinese premier, okay, for manipulating the WHO and everything. He has so many enemies. How can he be powerful? Just think about it. Okay, so Savita Narayan says, please repeat the 6 qualities of Rajguru. There will be a recording of this, Savita. So may I suggest you that, you go with the recording. And if you have any questions, feel free to write to me at mahesh@vedic-management.com. Okay. Okay, so one more. Fair enough. Sleepless night for him, of course. Okay, so I am 13 minutes more than my time. So I think I have taken enough of your time. Thank you so much. I'm truly pleased that this next topic has something like 90 students. So the Vedic rishis had always held that the Vedas are not for everyone. And I'm really glad that this many people are interested. So before I go, so let me thank you everyone for all your sincere support. It has been of great help. I would like to do more of this. And if you have any specific topic for me, you do let me know. And anything wrong I may have said, okay, I most humbly like to acknowledge that these mistakes will be mine. And anything good there is in whatever I've explained, those are for the rishis and the rishikas. There were also some female rishis who are called rishikas who have contributed to this knowledge. So thank you everyone. And the recording of this will be available on our website. So please feel free to access that. Thank you so much. Pranam and Namaste.